Welcome to the Hope After Child Loss podcast, where we endeavor to offer stories of hope to grieving parents and siblings so that they might rediscover life filled with meaning, purpose, and hope. We invite you to come and join us. Hey guys, I'm your host Greg Buffkin, and we are so glad you could join us for today's episode. My guests today are Eric and Marcy Larson. Both of these guys are physicians, Eric being an anesthesiologist and Marcy a pediatrician. So, guys, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you today.
Well, thank you so much for having us on.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure. And it's our honor to have you guys. So when I meet someone new, I always like to ask, especially when it's a couple, how'd you guys meet?
Oh, this is a funny story because
no,
it's a funny story. So Eric might give a little bit different answer than I would,
of course,
because we met in medical school, and we actually did talk maybe a couple times our first year of medical school, or at least you saw me, but that I didn't really remember. So this is very sad on my part that I did not. But Eric returns for year 2 of medical school, and he has even told your best friend that you were going to meet me, that he was going to meet me. And he did. And so what's funny is in medical school, this was a kind of crazy thing. At the bookstore that you had to go buy your books in was a student-run bookstore that was open for 45 minutes a day.
45 minutes?
45 minutes. It was open over noon, and that's it. And if you got in the door before it closed, then you could get your books. But if you didn't get in the door by the time it closed, you couldn't. So what was happening is I got in line with my friends, and we didn't even have our list of what we needed. It's so funny because this is 20 some years ago. So this is so different now, I'm sure. But we were outside the door, and the girl was coming to close the door. It was going to close the door on us. And Eric was right in front of us, and he quick scooted in so my 2 friends and I could get inside the doorway so they would close the door after us.
Chivalry is still alive.
I know.
Maybe chivalry, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but
ulterior motives.
Well, that too.
This test that he wanted to meet me. So, but anyway, now we're in there, and I didn't even know what all I needed. And so I was asking him for kind of the list of what we needed to pick out. And so he was kind of helping us get all of our books that we needed. And then what was it, like maybe 2 days later? We went to our pathology small group. So where you look over slides of diseased tissue, and Eric was in my pathology small group. And there were only like maybe 10 people in that small group. It was really small. And he was in there. And so he ended up walking me home the first day, because we ended up living in an apartment that was fairly close to the hospital medical school.
Student ghetto.
Yeah. The student ghetto. So anyway, we had apartments close to each other, and he walked me home and ended up asking me out, I think, that same day, didn't you?
I can't remember. It was soon afterwards.
It was either the same day or like the next week.
It was probably next week, yeah.
And what was funny is that, and you seem like this super nice guy. And I said, yes, of course. And then I go home to my roommate, and I said that, I said yes to this. Eric Larson asked me out on a date, and she goes, don't you remember that guy? That guy was the guy that stared at you last year, the guy with the broken arm. And I totally remembered this guy with the broken arm that used to like look at me across the auditorium. And and anyway, I thought it was kind of creepy, but fortunately I had forgotten all about it, because then we had our first date and ended up like falling in love, I suppose, over pathology slides. We were married 15 months later. So
it's not every couple that can claim their first meeting over pathology slides.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, you tell that story, you had no idea how interesting that was going to be.
It could have been an anatomy lab. It could have been worse.
Yeah, it could have been
worse.
Well,
that's true. And leave it to a physician to remember that he had a broken arm. That was your primary memory.
That was pretty much
and that's a funny story too, because he broke his arm because he was playing goalie. He was on the intramural medical school soccer team, right?
Yeah.
I am soccer, and they were playing against the intramural University of Iowa football team.
What?
So the guy that kicked the ball that he blocked that ended up breaking his arm with ended up as a running back in the NFL for years.
Wow. So you played against an NFL player, Eric. How cool.
Well, the score certainly showed that too. Yeah. I blocked a lot, but I think we still gave up like 13 goals.
Yeah.
Medical students versus the football team, not good contest.
Yeah.
No.
I had a sneaking suspicion this was going to be a medical school story. How else do two doctors end up together?
I know, exactly.
Not in these specialties.
No kidding. No kidding. Yeah. Well, guys, I want you to spend a few minutes telling us about Andy, about your son, Andy. You can go back as far as you like to. I would like for everybody just to know who Andy is.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for asking.
Sure.
That. I'm going to let Eric talk because I've been talking a ton. So go ahead.
And you always tell the story, really, of Andy. So
I do always tell the story of Andy. So I kind of want to hear you tell the story of Andy.
So I'll tell things we don't usually talk about. So Andy was our middle child. So we already had our daughter, Catherine. She was 2 when Andy was born. It was a rough pregnancy, as they all were with Marcy. She was always sick. And so I always had to put IVs in. She was nauseated.
It's great being married to an anesthesiologist who can put in IVs when you're sick every day.
It was a pain, really, going to the ER all the time for fluid. So anyway, but he was born, and right before we left our residency and done with Iowa City, we moved to Michigan for our career, I guess you'd say. Andy was the only one we actually found out ahead of time who was going to be a boy, because Marcy, we didn't find out the first one. And then Marcy said, I have to know if we're having a boy. And we did. And then for our son, Peter, the youngest, we never found out because she's like, it was more fun not knowing. But so Andy's born in Iowa City. He was about the last thing we did in Iowa City. We were there for about a month or 2 and then took off. And he was born in the new obstetrics wing. So we always tell him that he was born overlooking Kinnick Stadium, which is the football stadium there.
And we said he was going to be a Hawkeye for life.
Hawkeye fan, yep. So his little teddy bear that he had was Herky. It was a little, little Herky jersey or Iowa jersey that eventually deteriorated and fell apart at some point. He was a great kid, super nice, very insecure about himself, and he's always small, like all our kids, which I think he just didn't have enough time to get bigger, and so he had suffered some anxiety, and so he was always a little just anxious about things. And
he had ADD.
A very kind kid. Yeah. Loved sports, loved sort of being active. He loved his little brother. They were like best friends. And so they played all the time together.
He loved being on a team. He was never the star of the team, but I tell you, he was the star cheerleader of every team he was on.
Oh, how about that?
Loved that.
He was very different than me personality wise. He was smart, just in a different way. He was very emotionally, very, very highly intelligent emotionally. I mean, he really could just pick up on stuff. He was super musical. So he was, I remember one time, we're staying in the kitchen, the kids are doing piano lessons, they're practicing their piano, and, Catherine plays, and Peter's playing, the youngest. And I would say, I turned to Marcy, and Peter had always seemed like the very sort of deliberate. He seemed much more like me, where he's very I was an engineer as an undergrad, and so just kind of like more of my personality.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely is following stepwise. You follow the notes, right? You just play the notes.
Yeah. And
I'm telling Marcy, the thing about Peter, he's really good at the piano. He really gets all the notes right. And she said, yeah, but he's not musical. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, wait, Andy's gonna play. And then Andy played something and whatever. And I'm like, whoa, you can actually hear emotion. And I'm not that talented by any means, certainly not with singing. But anyway, so
that's what I remember saying to him. I said, listen to all the kids. One of them plays music.
Yeah.
The others all play the notes, but one plays music, and he could feel it. Could feel the music.
Wow.
He got so emotional.
That's a gift.
Went to a concert one time with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and I looked over at him, and he's weeping.
Oh.
Just weeping. And I turned to him and I said, Andy, what's wrong? And he said, the music, it's just so sad. And then I turned to his brother, Peter, and he looked at me and said, I'm hungry.
There's always one of those.
Yeah.
Like, not very many kids, little kids just would feel music like he did, but he felt it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Andy was, he passed away when he was 14, right? A week before high school. The week before high school, I should say. And he'd played soccer, and it's like Marcy mentioned, and he was always on teams, and he was never the star. But he enjoyed playing, and he would go all out. He's like the crazy kid and just dives into everything, even though he's super tiny compared to everyone else. And he made the JV soccer team. He's actually named a starter, and that is like 2 days before the car accident. He sort of had it all figured out. He was through student orientation. His brand new high school is a charter school here in town. It was the aviation academy, they call it, where they do aviation. You wanted to be a pilot, where you can get a pilot's license before you graduate from high school.
Yeah,
wow.
He was so excited.
He met a lot of nice boys. He felt like he fit in a lot better there than he had fit in the other previous schools. And he's just getting older, right? I think he's just kind of, you start finding yourself a little bit and getting comfortable with yourself.
Yeah, he was so happy. Yeah, when he got named starter, I remember him saying to me when I picked him up from soccer practice one day, he said, I've been playing the best soccer I've ever played in my whole life. And, he got named a starter. And I thought, oh, dear God, what's going to happen when they realize he's not as good as they think he is? But it turns out that never happened. So great kid, but he was a kid who was the one who would be excited about a vacation for like a month. And I would be excited about a vacation right about as soon as we left, or maybe even we're on the plane. And it would drive each of us crazy. Like, he was always the one who's just up and down, and I'm just very more level. And so, Dad, aren't you excited? Aren't you excited? Aren't you excited?
So that was always his favorite expression.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about whatever, or I'm so, so terrible, whatever it is. And so he was just, kind of up and down as a kid.
His favorite phrase was definitely, I'm so excited.
Yeah. So anyway, that's sort of who he was. Great friend, great brother.
Yeah.
Really was kid, but very emotional. So very different than me in many respects too, but more like Marcy.
Hey, you know what? That's the way it always is. Our daughter's like me, and our son was more like Kathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank the Lord, he looked more like her. So, guys, can you take us back to that day and just talk a little bit about that? I know it's a painful time, but I just want you to kind of talk us through some of that grief journey that you guys entered into that day. Y'all comfortable doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wouldn't mind having Eric do it, because actually I lost consciousness for a fair amount during it.
Okay.
So you can certainly go ahead.
It's the hard thing about any of these things is that there are always a million things. Had decisions been done differently, especially with an accident,
sure,
the outcome would be different. And so you can blame yourself for things. You feel guilty about it, angry, about if I had made that one traffic light or something. And so,
right.
what the short story is, we were struck by another car while we were driving, and Andy died instantly in a car wreck. But the longer story is, I got off work early that day. Marcy there's a minor league baseball team in town. She had a work event where they're going to have, you go to the deck where you eat a bunch of food and watch baseball games.
You can eat food. The boys were so excited to go.
Yeah, I'll bet.
What's funny is Andy loved the Whitecaps from when he was tiny. And in fact, when I picked him up from orientation that day, he said, "Oh, Mom, I'm so excited." And I was, because that was his favorite expression. So I said, "Excited about what? Excited about soccer practice? Excited about orientation?" And he goes, "No, we're going to the Whitecaps." So he was so excited to go see the West Michigan Whitecaps play their single A baseball game that night. And he went to soccer practice, and he came home, and it was supposed to be just three of us, just the two boys and me. My daughter had a violin lesson. We have a foster son. He was working. And I remember asking the boys, "Do you want it to just go with just the three of us? Since we can't all go." And I remember Peter saying, "Mom, I think it would be a great mother-son event. So we're going to do the mother-son event." And then, unexpectedly, like Eric said, he just got out early that day. And I quickly emailed someone at the office. I said, "Does there happen to be an extra ticket? Because Eric's off and he was on call. So we fully expected him to be working late." And they're like, "Yeah. yeah, we can. Do you want us to run it by your house? I said, no, I'll stop by the office and we'll get it on the way. We're going to have to drive past the office anyway. So that's one of those like little things. Had someone brought the ticket to our house, well, then we wouldn't have stopped at the office and we would have been a few minutes further down the road. And
Yeah.
but anyway,
You
go
always
ahead,
do a
Eric.
lot of second guessing in those situations.
Yeah,
Sure.
you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Right. So we're just in the exit lane waiting to exit into the stadium. It always is. We go to White Camp games all the time. And so it always backs up before games, obviously people exiting.
And there was construction too at the time because it was summer.
So there are two lanes that go sort of highway speeds, and then there's the one exit lane. Well, that is really long, especially as people are getting exiting onto the stadium. And we're going, I don't know, 5 miles an hour. But sometimes you go and you'll be it'll be sort of stop and go for a little while. And so I turn to Marcy and say, wow, it's kind of nice. We're actually moving. And so we're not going to be too late. Or it won't be much longer. We'll be at the game. And then it was like an explosion. And and then we're moving. And then we're like suddenly in the off the road in the ditch. We had actually gone through. I mean, I didn't even see this because I think the airbag deployed. And
so you didn't see it coming?
I never did. No, I mean, I always, there are a million things to look back. Like what if I looked back in the rearview mirror? What if because I could have flashed my lights or something, seen something. But we were traveling 5 miles an hour. The one who struck us in her car was traveling highway speeds like 70 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, fortunately for her, she was okay. She had a 14-year-old son who was not injured badly at all.
No, neither one of them really injured.
How ironic.
So I never lost consciousness. Marcy was okay, and then she was like,
I was breathing and moaning, I think you said.
Yeah, you're moaning.
But I was unconscious.
Yeah. Peter was okay because I could see that he was all right. He was like breathing and stuff. But Andy looked very still. And so I was trying to like, Andy, you okay? And then I realized something was wrong. And so then I got out of the car and I ran and tried to get him out. And I think I had to pull him out through the driver's side, I think.
Yeah, that's what people
because
said.
I couldn't get, because that side door the slider door was not doing.
Oh gosh.
Into the ditch and started doing CPR. Another guy was there who happened to be
Army
military
medic, yeah.
Army medic, and so he helped CPR until eventually some firefighters came. And anyway, I asked them if they had anything. They said they don't really have anything because he was bleeding quite a bit and not responsive. And anyway,
you just kept thinking you could put in an IV and he would be okay. And he just kept thinking, you just like, that's his job, right? His job is that's his job. So,
I'm so sorry.
You didn't think that would happen.
So then the ambulance finally got there and they sort of just took over. And I went over and sat with Marcy, who was sitting by this car. Peter at that time was, I think he had been moved.
They moved him to the fire truck.
And he was sitting there, watching the whole thing. Now, we turned out later, it turns he was unconscious, but he saw me pull Andy out of the van. So he saw most of everything. Yeah. Although his glasses were off, so maybe he didn't see quite as well as he could, but he knew enough. And so we sat at the side of the road for a while, watched them working on him from in the distance a little ways, although I didn't have my glasses either, so I couldn't see great. And then eventually
I kind of came to, and I remember asking Eric, is he going to be okay? And at first Eric said yes. And then I remember very specifically he said, well, they're doing the best they can. And then I knew that was no. I knew it was no. And then I started just pleading to God. I just said, please, God, please, God, please, God, please, God. I couldn't stop. I mean, like, those were the only words out of my mouth. And then they said, ma'am, we need to take you to your other son in the fire truck because they thought I was kind of going crazy. So I got to Peter on the fire truck and I said, Peter, we just need to pray. Just pray. Because I just thought if I just prayed hard enough,
sure,
that he would come back to us, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then it wasn't very long before then they took Eric and I into an ambulance, and they said, ma'am, we need to take you in the ambulance. We need to check you out because I was bleeding too, and and had lost consciousness and was pretty banged up. But that's not why they took us to the ambulance, because they took us to the ambulance and they didn't put us on a gurney. They put us both in chairs, and they said, despite our best efforts, we were unable to save your son.
Oh, so sorry.
Which was so hard because, I mean, you just don't think your son's going to die on the side of the road. Like, if anything, you're going to make it to the hospital.
Of course.
And he just never made it to the hospital, which was hard for me as a pediatrician to like wrap my head around. I felt like we should at least get him to the hospital.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I can. I mean, thinking about the fact that both of you guys are trained physicians, and yes, I mean, Eric, you hold people's lives in your hands every day, being an anesthesiologist,
Yep.
and both of you guys, it's your job to keep people healthy and keep them alive. And I can't imagine the added layer of helplessness that there must have been uh, because of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. Like, as a parent, you feel like it's your job to protect
Sure.
kids. As a pediatrician, it's my job to protect kids. So, like, I mean, I felt like that was my double job. Whenever we're like out in public somewhere and, say something, we've been places where a kid has collapsed and he turns to me and like, that's you. And if it's an adult, I will say, and
You.
that's you, right? That's what we do.
Right.
And and then it really was hard on me too, emotionally, because I had lost consciousness. I had kind of come to and apparently was even walking around, but I have no memory of this. And that's hard on me as a doctor, knowing I was walking
Well, you
around
were in
and I
shock,
wasn't
Marcy.
doing anything. I know I was. I mean, I know I was. I have no memory.
Right.
I know that. Logically, I know that. But still, inwardly, I felt like I should have been doing something. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that Eric was there because he was doing more than I ever could have done. Um, but it's just hard.
Yeah. Well, the guilt that you feel about things like that in those moments it's not logical. It's just
No.
because of what's going on at the moment. You
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
how where did you guys go from there? I mean, obviously, now that you've lost your son,
Yeah.
and so did you guys have community in your lives where people
Yeah.
that were
Yeah. I mean,
close?
it's interesting. Like, so that night, what ended up happening was so Andy was brought straight to the morgue, which is at a different hospital than we were brought. So we never got to see him
Yeah.
at all, but we had to be brought into a different hospital because we all had to be checked out. Peter and I both lost consciousness. And, so we were there. Well, I told you I had this work event. So it's my entire pediatrics office was there at the baseball game. And I had to call them and tell them we've been in an accident. Andy's dead. And those are the exact words I used because I was like, I can't give I just had to get it out in as few words as I possibly
Sure.
could and be totally direct.
Yeah.
Not leaving any ambiguity because I need to just say this and not have to say it again. So, we've been in an accident and he's dead. That's it. And they all came. I mean, my entire office just came to the hospital and they gave them a waiting room and they had their own waiting room. I was in a leader in BSF Bible study. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an international Bible study. So I was a leader in that, and several members of the leadership team came to the hospital that night to pray with us. There was one that was working at another hospital, and she just got someone to cover for her and left and came. We had a friend of yours came and sewed up his head because he had a bad cut on his head. He's a plastic surgeon. And we just had people just show up. Our pastors were there quickly.
They're all just
everybody was there right away. And our pastor had to go get our daughter because, she was home by herself and didn't know what was happening. So.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's amazing how God shows up in those moments and has people so strategically situated to step in those moments when you feel so incredibly alone and isolated and just, your world's been turned upside down,
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
Wow.
100%. And it's really funny too, because, now all of a sudden we have to do a funeral home and we have to do all this stuff. And we have care coordinators in our office that have helped and that have known, kids that have died and funeral homes that they've used. And so we got a nice funeral home that's close to the area. And he was talking to us and he he hadn't talked to us very long, and he has this whole packet of information, right? And he takes one of the little flyers out, flips it to the back, and circles something on the back. And what he circled was Starlight Ministries, and who the program director at the time was Gwen Capshaw, was her name. And he said, I see that you are people of faith. Call this woman. Call this woman, because Starlight Ministries is a ministry really that was started by a Christian couple whose son died. And it was to kind of help their kids and help parents. And then it helps people who've lost their spouse. It's all sorts of great bereavement services. But I didn't know what to do. So I remember sitting on the bed and thinking, okay, he told me to call this woman, so I guess I'm calling this woman.
Well,
and we just showed up. We went over there. It's now just days after Andy's funeral. We're there. We're at Starlight. We started in a support group at 3 weeks. Andy had gone 3 weeks in a support group because I just felt like I needed to do something and I didn't know what to do. And I just needed somebody to tell me what to do.
Sure. Well, you had, it's one of those places where you've never been before. You weren't, nobody is equipped or prepared to lose their child. You just went through having to plan a funeral, and you have to do all of those legal things that no parent should ever have to do. You think that it will be your kids doing that for you someday.
Yep.
Right.
I'm amazed that you guys were able to jump into that just after 3 weeks.
Well, I just think we just didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Yeah, we had gone to someone before then. I don't remember.
Yeah, we did go to a grief counselor right away.
Was really weird, and so we could go back to her.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing against her, just didn't quite work, and so we went to the session. And
what was it like?
As most of those things are, everyone's lost kids. Some people had lost adult children. Some had lost infants. Some had lost special needs kids. I think there weren't. I don't think there's any cancer, maybe, but like for a child. But there wasn't. I don't think there's anyone there actually that time with an accident who was there.
Yeah.
No.
So our story is unique in that sense, and so in listening to people their story, I thought, well, it's amazing. All these people, they have sort of. There's a similar thread, right? Like, it's unnatural, whatever. Right. And so the fact that they're all still here, I guess you can survive this because it certainly didn't feel like you could sort of ever come out the other end of this sort of.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
And we got back and I said, well, that was pretty helpful. And Marcy said, well, I thought it was terrible.
No, I did. The first time I thought it was terrible.
No. She didn't relate to anybody.
I just didn't. And I think the big thing is I was still so much in shock that the thought that kept going through my head as I'm sitting there listening to some of these people talk is a voice screaming in my head kept saying, you don't belong here. You don't belong here. He's fine. He's at home. This is not happening to you. You are not one of these people. That's what I was thinking to myself. I cannot be one of those people. I cannot be a bereaved parent. It just takes a while to settle in. So you say you were shocked that we were there. I mean, honestly, I shouldn't have been because I wasn't probably in a space to be ready for that. But Eric really was. And I remember too, the kids were like, yeah, I did not want to be there. And I said, well, it was really good for your dad. So we're all going back. And then it turns out it ended up being just amazing. And now I facilitate for them in a virtual group.
Oh,
so
that's great.
I mean, we're heavily involved in Starlight still now 4.5 years later. So,
well, let's talk about something that you just touched on. So we all know that everybody grieves differently, but men and women also grieve differently. So for you guys, talk about that a little bit. What it was like for you, Eric, how the grief manifested itself in your life, and Marcy, then you can follow with the impact that it had on your mom's heart, your heart as a mom, I should say.
Yeah.
I thought it was identical. I thought no,
we did not.
Not at all. I don't know. I always try and think about to answer like exactly how it was for me. I mean, for me, it was always just the sense of loss and the sense of just not having new memories. I just felt like robbed. That was sort of the main thing. It's just angry at the situation. I was never angry at the woman who struck us, which is I always felt I felt a little bit guilty. I was never like mad at her. I felt like I should have been.
Because I was mad.
And maybe you were angry for both of us. And so I didn't feel like I needed to be.
Yeah. And maybe that is
I
it.
don't know.
Yeah.
I always felt bad for her because I'm thinking unless she's like a sociopath that she would feel. I mean, I can't imagine for me. I'm like, I imagine myself because I was driving. So I mean, what if I was the car behind? I don't know, live with myself, right? It'd be tough. So anyway, so, and then for me, it was the hard thing, is sort of trying to kind of go through the motions, right? At some point I just needed to do something. I couldn't just home and do nothing. I could, going back to work was important to me to just get some level of normalcy, to see people I'd normally see, because, we were at the receiving line at the before the visitation. And, I mean, there are tons and tons of people there and all people I worked with and stuff. And it was, I was actually felt rejuvenated, which is kind of weird because I've been just empty for a couple of days. And so I thought, well, I probably need to go back to that. My group was great. They took away my call, obviously. They were very sensitive to, and I just ended up working in one place. Because the hardest thing really is, I think, telling the story, or feeling like feeling that it's a subject you need to talk about all the time. Not that you don't, I know.
You just feel like everyone's looking at you and thinking about it anyway.
Yeah, you want people to acknowledge it, but you also don't want it to just be all consuming for the entire day. It's exhausting to tell the story. So I was able to work at the same place, a very small surgery center. So everybody kind of knew. We all talked about it the first day or two, and then sort of like it's known what happened. Obviously, everyone knows. We just kind of go about our lives. And it was
a plastic surgery center too, so they were all like relatively healthy people and no kids, which was, I think, nice for you too, to not have to do anesthesia on kids.
He was 14, but he was tiny. He was a very small child, so he was like a little kid. He was probably the size of a 10 or 11-year-old, especially in this area, which are giants, Dutch. So for me, it was getting back and seeing people, and then it just slowly sort of getting back to the other places I worked. I worked at 8 different locations, and so it was just kind of a matter of going to those places and meeting the people, and then you have to sort of compartmentalize in some ways. It was conversations because it's suddenly October, and people are complaining about their kids with their Halloween costumes, and they got to do this, that, the other thing, and it's just normal stuff, right? Conversations you have a million times in your life. But now, I don't have a kid.
August that accident was.
So I don't have a kid who's that's going to, maybe it was going to be his last time trick or treating. I don't even know. So there are just those things that people, the day-to-day things that aggravate people. You're like, boy, I'd love to have that aggravation, but so it's a lot of the hard thing for me was just getting used to those things and then recognizing that in some ways it's good that people feel comfortable enough to talk about those things. And I'm glad that they have those things. It's hard though to sort of have that grace to say, it's okay talking about these things and to not, because you don't want to make it all about you and just make it, because people can, by walking eggshells, they make things worse too. So you want people to feel normal. That was my feeling, that I want people to kind of feel comfortable and normal. And if they want to talk about them, I would always talk about it. And I felt very similar to when we had a miscarriage, but their first. That as soon as you have something like that, you meet 25 more people who had miscarriages. Like they come up to you and say, "Oh, we lost a child," but no one talks about it, right? And losing Andy, I had so many people come up to me with problems that I'd never heard them talk about. They lost a cousin, they lost their son, they lost their parent, they lost, or someone whose son was going through drug and alcohol problems, and all these things that they felt like they could. And I don't know if they would even ask me for advice, like, how do you do so, which was good. And so for me, it was very helpful to be sort of in that community, and because that was my social network, right? Was my work. And I had a friend who is also, is a very good friend who's also a counselor, and he actually does trauma work. And so we go walks a lot of times. I'd like to think it's just because we were friends, but I think part of it was just because he also was.
I think they were therapy sessions a little bit.
I guess he kind of snuck that in as you guys were walking, huh?
Right. But he was, but to your point, just people are the right place at the right time. And so, these connections you'd made earlier in life that made a difference. And so these people brought me comfort and at least, the ability to sort of get through the day. But for a long time, I just felt numb. And so, very often all the time, I'm like, man, I wish I could, I can hear him laugh, or I can, I can hear exactly what he would say when I tell some bad joke or something like that. And just, I just usually just miss him just because I just feel kind of robbed. I don't get probably as emotional. Well, I know I don't get as emotional as Marcy, but it still bothers me all the time. I know and every kind of emotion happens: angry, regret, loss, sadness, guilt, and all those things sort of just kind of come and go. I don't have all of them at once. For a while, you sort of just all jumbled up. But
well, I think that's very normal. I know I experienced a lot of what you're talking about, Eric, and I think for dads, we don't have the same deep emotional displays that a mom does, but we still grieve. And sometimes it shows up as depression. Sometimes it shows up as anger. But men absolutely do grieve. And you wrestle with the guilt. You wrestle with the what ifs. And, if only I had, and you fill in the blank. So, but man, I appreciate you being so transparent.
Yeah, well, I'm always more than happy to talk to people about it. Because I look at how I lived before. It's funny. You go through something like this, and we had a number of people who said after Andy's funeral, for instance, they said, "Well, it was beautiful. It was an amazing ceremony," which I've not had the courage to watch again.
Yeah,
it's on our YouTube channel, but I've never watched it. But people say, "Oh, they brought so many people closer to God and this sort of thing," and without a doubt, I'm sure it did all those things.
right.
But you're sort of upset that that's sort of the thing that has to happen. But also, I'm a different person. I'm more empathetic. I'm a better doctor. There's so many things I'm just much better because of it. I hate that. And there's some guilt. Like, you feel like, why did this have to happen so that I can be a better person?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I now, I would always have patients on occasion. I only have a few minutes with them as I'm wheeling back to the operating room. You talk about just random stuff. And occasionally some loss would come up. Like, they recently lost a spouse or they lost a child sometime. And I would just not talk about it or if a coworker had something, I just wouldn't talk about it because I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't make them feel bad. And then it was after this, I'm like, okay, well, I can't make someone feel bad because they already feel terrible. I can't possibly do anything that's going to make that person feel like they're really now I really am sad that my son's gone. Of course they were sad.
So, man, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it, Eric.
Yeah. So for me, it was, I wanted people to feel comfortable talking about him or things and not to feel uncomfortable. Not that we needed to discuss it, but just that, I had one of the doctors, and she's very super sweet surgeon I work with. And she said, I worked with her most like half the day, and it hadn't come up. Right. And so suddenly it's like the elephant in the room, like, she hasn't addressed it. I'm like, does she know? Should she know? I don't know. And so you're just like going back and forth, what you should how you approach it. And I know, and I'm like, she has to have known. Kind of everybody in the OR knows, but maybe not. And then if not, then anyway. So I think she was talking to one of the nurses. The nurse said, that she just didn't know what to say. She felt really uncomfortable. I said, you know what, it's okay. And so I went up to her. I said, don't feel like we need to talk about it, but it's okay to say you feel sorry, and we're good. But you almost just need to have it addressed that something has happened. And I think that's always the challenge. I think is that if it becomes the big elephant in the room, no one's talking about it, but everyone's sort of thinking about it. And just by saying, I'm really sorry for your loss, and that can just be it. You don't have to go into do a counseling session. You just go about your job, and it's all been acknowledged. And maybe if they want to talk about something, sometimes you would. Sometimes we have a long discussion. It was, I think, I've in many ways have felt sort of like that I need to be a model for other people so that they can talk about stuff. I'm not like I say I'm not a talkative person. I'm pretty introverted, but here I'm just rambling on. But no, in seriousness, I think, I think it's important to present yourself the way you think you would want other people to, treat you, I guess, right? It's like some golden rule thing. So I think that's what I try and do and try and help people. And I guess that's why I went to medicine, but I just feel bad that sort of you have to go through this sort of thing to be.
Wow. Well, that is well said, Eric. And to your point a few minutes ago, you don't experience something like that and emerge the same person. It forever changes you. And thankfully, when we lean into it and in a relationship with God, he can help use that for good in other people's lives. And obviously has given you guys a heart to help other people.
Yeah, it's funny because he talked about his experience, and mine was quite different.
Yeah.
So in that,
my unhelpful advice.
he was kind of unhelpful, I do have to say at the beginning, because how he talked about how helpful it was for him to go to work and to have some of that normalcy and feel safe and feel really strengthened by people around him. So he would come home and like, you need to go back to work. You just need to go back to work. Go back to work. And I felt pretty pressured to go back to work. So I did. I'm guessing it was a little over a month after Andy died. I went back to work. And then we had all sorts of rules at the office, like Marcy doesn't see pairs of brothers because of, my boys being in the car together. And Marcy can't see car accident. Still, we are 5 years later. Marcy still does not see victims of car accidents. That is kind of a known thing. I just can't do that. See kids that have been in car accidents.
Fortunately,
but it's not. It doesn't come up that often, but it has. But it was, and then my MA, my medical assistant, would say, Dr. Larson really appreciates your heart, because of course everyone knew. They all knew. I mean, we were all over the news, for goodness sake. You could not know. But we really need to make this visit about your child today. So, but the problem, of course, is I would always get this look, because I'm seeing all moms. They're all moms, and they all look at me with this pity look, and it just was so hard. I mean, I cried between every single patient. I would see a patient, I would go cry. I would see another patient, and I would go cry. And my coworkers were amazing. I mean, they were really trying to be helpful, but it was just impossible for me to see all of these unbroken families when my family is so broken, and my mama's heart is so broken. And I remember the first patient I absolutely couldn't see, that was on my schedule, had been put back, and we've had them fill out these surveys ahead of time on what they want to talk about. And she went on and on and on about how her toddler wouldn't sleep. And I'm like, I can't do that. I don't have it in me to have a sleep discussion right now. I cannot talk for 25 minutes about how to get your toddler to sleep and hear that complaining. So I had to have somebody else see that patient. And then it just what happened is Halloween came too, and all the kids are all dressed up and all of that. And I was done. I just couldn't do it anymore. It was just too hard. I mean, it was so draining that I just was done. I had to take a leave of absence. I went on disability and completely left the office, and I didn't go back for a year.
Wow.
So it was just a full year, because I just couldn't do it. And it got to a point where I thought I never would. I just was like, I don't think I can do this. And I started seeing a therapist who's amazing. She just primarily does grief. And I said to her, I don't think I can ever be a pediatrician again. And she said, oh, you can if you want to. We will get you there. I promise we can get you back there if you want to. And if you don't, that's okay. But if you want to, we can get you back. But what's funny is that now I'm going to transition onto what I've been doing, I think, is that what made me be able to go back was so the next spring, it was probably late spring, probably this time of year, I was at home. Of course, Eric's working, kids are in school. And I thought, I bet there is a podcast for parents who have lost children. There's a podcast on everything. There has to be a podcast. And so I started looking to see if there was a podcast on child loss. And I found some podcasts on grief, but there weren't any for grieving parents. Eric came home, and I said, I was looking for a podcast to listen to on child loss, because I was having trouble reading, because I couldn't even really concentrate. And he said, "Oh, there has to be. You just didn't look right."
I had to mansplain to her.
I know. So he goes and he's searching and he said, "You're right. There isn't one." And I don't even know where this came from, but I said, "I think I'm supposed to start one. I think God wants me to start one." Like, I don't know. I mean, it was really God put it in my head because I'm not a techie person. I don't like computers. I don't do any of that. I didn't even really, Eric had a podcast at the time. He still has a couple podcasts now. But anyway, I didn't even listen to his. I mean, I was like, that is not me. And so for me to feel like God wanted me to do that seems sort of crazy. And as soon as I said it, I wished I hadn't. I wanted to like take it back because Eric jumped all over it. He's like, "I think you're right. I think so." And he met this guy. Well, he was friends with this guy in South Carolina who does websites, and he's a Christian. And he's like, "I will help make her website." And we didn't even have to pay him for it. I mean, he got like one of his interns was working on a project. "She can help make your website. She can do all of this stuff. I think this is a great ministry that you should do." And then I'm like backtracking, like trying to get out of it. Like, no, I don't think so. I don't know. And I'm backing up. And he's like, no, just try it. Just try it. We're just going to put out like 3 episodes. And so it came to August. And what's funny, we recorded the first one and I said, I'm not very technically savvy and I'm not. So I forgot to press record. So Eric and I did a whole thing and we get to the end and I hadn't pressed record.
I bet that one was really good.
Well, it wasn't meant to be. God did not want me to do this. And Eric's like, "No, let's just do it again." So we did it again and it was way better the second time. It was way better. And I was like, okay, God maybe just didn't want me to press record that first time because this time is much better. I recorded 2 more, one with Gwen, one with another mom that I had met at Starlight that was at that group who is now works at Starlight. And so we released 3 of them in September. So it was 13 months after Andy died, we released these episodes and we were again on the news. And of course we were again a big story because now I started a podcast and they got to show, clips of our accident and clips of Andy singing, which Andy has a beautiful voice. If you do go to my website, andysmom.com, you can click on him and see his beautiful singing and listen to him. But it sort of took off then. And we did those 3 episodes. And what was amazing is I had my first review on Apple iTunes. And it said, "I just lost my son 3 weeks ago. And after listening to your podcast, I could get up this morning."
Oh, wow. Made it all worthwhile.
I was like, okay. I thought, if that's the only woman I touch and can help, that's enough. Yeah. And, we've gone on and now, we're 3.5 years in and 190 some episodes and still going. And I've met so many amazing parents across the world, around the world, actually. I've had people all over. And it's just the strength that we can give each other as bereaved parents is unbelievable, right? And I started that. I told you I started that in September. By November, I was strong enough to go back to work. And I didn't think I was ever going to go back to work. And within 2 months of starting the podcast, I went, it was, they were having a really bad sick season here in West Michigan in November. And the walk-in was really busy. We have a walk-in clinic every morning. And I said, I think I'm okay to like start going to walk-in. And so I started at walk-in and pretty soon I'm like, I think I'm okay to work more. It's funny because I found like this purpose for my grief.
Yeah.
And be able to do the podcast and be with these people. And like, it was a place where my grief could live and kind of almost flourish with me that I could not be. I mean, it was not to be ashamed of, right? I wasn't ashamed of my grief. I was living it publicly, openly. But then it gave me time to take breaks to kind of go back and go to the office and see patients. And by January, I was back to like, I don't know, 30, 40% time. And by February, I was back to my full hours that I had been on before, which was only half time. But still, I was back to 3 days a week at the office.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
February. I mean, it was
What
just
an
amazing.
amazing story of something that you were so afraid of and just absolutely feared you would never be able to do again. Go back to work as a
Uh-huh.
physician, and then the whole idea of doing something that was so foreign to you, starting a podcast. And I can identify with
Yeah.
that. I know how scary that is because I'm
Yeah.
not real tech savvy either. But to see what God did with all of that, and now the lives that you have already touched and will continue to, because of all of those episodes that are up and available to people, like you said, all over the world. And you only know of the ones that you know about. What you don't know
Right.
are the ones that your podcast has touched that you'll never meet. But maybe one episode met them
Yep.
exactly where they needed to hear it.
It's so funny because we have episode 200 coming up, and we were talking about that and what we were going to do special. And we had asked that maybe people could write in and say, this is something that really touched me.
Oh, that would be awesome.
I had one the other day talk to me because a few months ago I had a woman on who lost her son Locke to SIDS, and they're in South Dakota, and she does a lot of amazing work in his name. And she said, "I so much of this can be done because Locke lived." And I had a mom write to me and say, I love that because I always kept thinking, oh, I'm doing all of this stuff, but it's because her son died. And to say, oh no, it's not because he died. It's because he lived.
Absolutely.
That's just such a
Yeah.
change, right? When I can say I'm doing the podcast and I'm doing all of this because Andy lived.
Yes.
Well, that's different.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's a world apart. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank the Lord that you were able to get to that, make that transition from the
Yeah.
focus that consumes you with his death to now you celebrate his life every time you do an episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so awesome.
Well, and it's funny, the pandemic came, and of course we had all of our Starlight support groups, and they all had to go virtual for a period of time here. And so I was in a virtual support group through Starlight, and then the virtual support groups sort of ended because they went back to in person, or they were going to end. And I said, I've met a lot of women and men, but primarily the women I was thinking about with the support group, that have nowhere to go. There's not Starlight Ministries in every town. They are, few and far between are there ministries for grieving parents. And I said, what would you think if I facilitated a group and I kind of advertised it on the podcast that they could register still through Starlight here in Michigan, but they can be from anywhere. And that has been amazing. So we started this virtual support group. And what's funny is the women we've become so close that a group of them decided we needed to meet. So we 11 of us just met in Ohio at a state park in Ohio. We rented a house. We hadn't met before, but we were all there as grieving Christian moms. And it was unbelievable. I mean, it was unbelievable. It felt like, I'm meeting family, not strangers.
Yeah.
Because we had this common bond.
Yeah. It's not a bond that anybody would choose, but it's like I've told so many people, like you said, you get to meet so many amazing people who have experienced the same trauma that you have. And it is amazing the camaraderie, the community that forms so quickly. Yeah. Well, Eric and Marcy, I just want to say thank you so much for all that you are doing and all that you have been doing now for going on 4 years, reaching out to grieving moms and grieving parents. What an amazing ministry. And you guys, you also have a website, if I'm not mistaken, where you do other things besides the podcast, right? Or is that the primary thing?
Well, I mean, that is the primary thing is the podcast. Yeah. I'm also doing a little bit with trying to speak with medical professionals, about, physicians, medical students, things like that, about trying to teach them how to work with grieving people, because really you're not taught that in medical school at all. And I'm currently working with the state of Michigan on a bereavement training for a lot of the public health department, the nurses and things like that, so they can kind of know what to do when they are called into a circumstance where there's been a death of a child or someone close in the family, because, people just don't know instinctively. They just don't know how to act.
That is some important work. I'll make a note to pray for you about that, because that's something that if you can do there, that hopefully can be taken to other states as well, and to other medical communities, medical schools. Because that not only do they not teach that in medical school, but nobody learns how to handle those situations, whether it's even in church world. Even in church community, you're not equipped.
Oh yeah. So sometimes that's the worst comments that you end up getting, honestly, is just because they think like, oh, I just need to remind them to focus on heaven. Like, okay, I don't need reminder for that. It really doesn't make 5 minutes from now any better. It's like, ultimately I know that information, but now you're just making me feel guilty and like I'm a bad Christian if I'm not feeling, yay, Andy's in heaven all the time.
Yes, I've experienced that myself. Yes, people mean well,
but just I remember speaking to a group of medical students a few years ago now. It was 3 years ago, and it was just virtually, or maybe it was 2 years ago. But anyway, and I had a few of them email back, and a couple in particular really struck me. One of them said that was the best talk. They were third-year medical students. That was the best, most important talk they had ever heard in their 3 years of medical school. And the other one said, I was just about ready to quit because I felt like I couldn't be a person anymore if I was a doctor, and you gave me permission to feel and be like a person. And so because she had gone, because she had lost a sibling had died, and that's why she wanted to become a physician. And then everything was just all the science, all whatever, nothing emotional, nothing about talking to families, any of what she thought she wanted to bring comfort to families. And there was none of that in the training. And she was thinking, this was a big mistake. I need to quit. But you're now $200,000 in debt from medical school. Yeah. How do you quit? But anyway, it gave her a little hope that the compassion can be there. And it's important that it is there. And you're a better doctor when you've got the compassion. That's what Eric talked about. He's a better doctor. I'm a better pediatrician. I thought I was going to be a cruddy pediatrician, but it turns out I'm actually better. Yeah. Because I understand pain and suffering in ways that other people just don't.
Yeah. Well, you guys keep up the good work that you're doing. I appreciate both of you. I appreciate you guys being so open and transparent today and sharing your hearts. I know that there are going to be a lot of people that hear this episode and their lives are going to be touched. They're going to be encouraged, and hopefully they'll be able to plug into the fact that there is hope. And I appreciate you bringing that up just a moment ago. That's what we want for people.
Well, and I do need to bring up too that if you want to listen to Greg on my podcast, Greg and Kathy, his wife, are on my podcast. And I think that one's being released before this one is. So you can look at episode 194 on Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom, and you can listen to Greg and Kathy.
Well, thank you. That was very kind.
I'm going to do one non sequitur.
Absolutely.
Mind. So one important, you talked earlier about just how, God puts people in our place when we need them. And one of the most impactful people in some ways was my accountant.
Wow.
And so Dave, he's also Christian, but he was talking to me because at some point there are the practical matters of when your child passed away, right? The funeral, all those sorts of things. And there are other things like, you have school savings accounts that you've been saving, all kinds of things, right? And so you have to kind of go into, and Marcy wasn't working. What is it, sort of what impact do these sorts of things have to do with each other? So I met with him and we talked for a few minutes and he said, you probably don't think about this, but as an accountant, I see people in their worst times. Business falls apart, marriages dissolve, there are deaths in the family, their spouses or parents or children. And he said, and there's a lot of just pain. And he had a stack of books, the same book, actually just one book. He had a stack of them in his office. Because I was talking about the struggle that Marcy's having at the time, which we didn't touch on, is that, I mentioned I didn't have any anger towards this woman, but who struck us. But Marcy, it was really, really hard for her. Anger was like a real common emotion you carried.
Yeah. Although by the time she went to trial, because of course it went to trial. By the time she went to trial,
I went to arraignment. It never go to trial. Yeah.
Well, because it went to arraignment. But by the time we had our final court date, I had forgiven her and even hugged her in court that day. So, but you're right. It was a long time coming.
But the book he gave me was, and I recommend this to everybody. It's a very short book by Lewis Smedes, who I think has passed away. He's a pastor here, I think somewhere in West Michigan. But anyway, it's called The Art of Forgiving, where he talks about the importance of forgiveness. And so much of it is actually forgiveness is for you. It's not for the person you're forgiving. And,
right.
And I think I never had really appreciated that aspect of it. And it is, whether you have a dispute with your spouse or some family member or something, it's so important to let that go because it will just eat you alive. And that was eating Marcy alive. And I was like, I got to find somebody to help her. And I think it helped you. It certainly helped me. I mean, I didn't have the same struggles, but it certainly helped me understand.
Right. Because I didn't like myself angry. Yeah. I'm not an angry person. I mean, pediatricians by nature are not.
Well, you don't want one.
So it was really, really hard to live with that anger. And once I was able to let go of that, it was really helpful as well.
I would recommend anyone who feels like they have problems with forgiving someone for something, anything, that is a very powerful book, and it's lays it out very simply why it's so important. So anyway, Art of Forgiving.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Eric, and you're right. It's amazing the power in choosing to forgive. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, again, thank you so very much. It's been an honor to have both of you today.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for having us.
If you find our podcast meaningful, we invite you to follow us so that you can automatically receive the latest episodes. Also, we'd like to invite you to contact us and talk with us about sharing your story on a future episode, because every story is important and matters to God. Please reach out via email at hope@emptychairendeavor.com. That's hope@emptychairendeavor.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening.